everybody for your patience. Okay, Sebastian, can you hear us? I see you said go for it. Can you hear our voices okay? There's Marianne. Hi, Marianne. Yeah, she waves. That means she can hear us. Okay, cool.
Weighing in. So good to see some new folks too. And we are just going to start with roll call, but I see that everyone's here, including Marianne, on the Zoom. So the steering committee is here at quorum. We have public comments on non-agenda items first. Everybody knows the agenda is primarily the feedback on the design guidelines, but also an upcoming meeting and the landscape ordinance and the tree budget request. So if there's anything not in that list that people want to bring up. Anything? Anyone from the committee? Rogue comments?
Is anybody on Zoom?
Good. Any hands up? Okay. So announcements from committee members, including you, Marianne, from Austria. Announcements. Committee members. Okay. Now we're to discussion items, and we're going to just start with the first thing. That we have the draft. We have the draft as of February 9th of the guidelines that we've been waiting for, and Brandon and I talked about sort of trying to maybe organize the discussion, depending on whether we need to, we'll see, into some kind of first high-level comments maybe about the document that might apply document-wide, for example, and then we might be able to drill down on some more specifics. I also know that the Preservation Association has a PowerPoint, which is that kind of ready to go, or?
Yeah, we have the laptop there available.
Okay, and it will show up on the big screen there? Yeah. Okay. So we can do that at any moment. Does anyone have any super high level?
Would it be okay? Yeah, would it be okay if I do sort of like a staff introduction of what we're doing here? So, thank you everybody for coming. As you know, this is the first draft of our design guidelines, and as the chair pointed out, we're trying to, at this point in the stage, at least, we're going to get a lot of really specific feedback. We really do want to get that high level feedback. So, some of the things we've noted at the staff level, and I talked to Nori about this already, is that there's a lot, we have noted that, the content seems to be really good. There's definitely an organizing exercise that needs to take place still to meet that stated goal in the early onset of making it a more usable, functional document, because we've added so much great content from the, the previous iteration. We had these, like the value of place, and these documents that weren't incorporated before. Those are all important things. Now that all that information has come into this document and we've combined the preliminary and final details, it become a little bit unwieldy. So we recognize that. I imagine we'll hear that comment today, but rest assured, we know that that's one of the next tasks through this information gathering and next round of editing phase is to look at how to maybe restructure it in a way to make it more usable for everybody. But I really appreciate everyone putting in the time over the last few weeks to look at this. I know it's a beast. And we have other regulatory documents out on the street right now. So thank you all, many of you who sent in comments ahead of time are at this table. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay, so why don't, David told me earlier today that he has, he thinks some of the folks that are with him might wait till he gives the PowerPoint that they've developed. So if it's all right, any reason not to hear the PowerPoint first and just kind of get the ball rolling that way? Is that all right, Brandon?
Yes, that's fine with me. Just up to you.
Just a second. Yeah. So David, maybe you want to talk a little bit about, you know, who was involved in putting it together and all that, and then
as I'm pulling out that.
Okay, well, I'm really grateful for everybody who's participating in this. Steering committee, the staff, the neighbors, and everything has been amazing. I started going through this on my own and then started talking with neighbors. I have talked to and presented this to the Carmel Preservation Association as well to get their feedback and information. But this is a broader stroke than just the Carmel Preservation Association, if you don't mind. Like Brandon said, this is a beast to get through for all of us, and I've been through it 3 times now because I care, because I think that this is really important. I think that if we can get this really honed out, then we're going to have a lot less arguments and challenges in the future and a lot more harmony in the community.
All right, so Sebastian, can you please make sure that what I have on the screen there is showing on Zoom? I'll run it for you from here.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide. So we've had a lot of discussion about the term simple that was used a lot in both the commercial and residential design guidelines. There was a suggestion that was really good about using the word restrained. I'd also like to suggest another word for your consideration, the word suitable. So if we look at the definitions that would be used in argument for different elements, perhaps in the future, simple is plain, basic, uncomplicated in form and nature or design without much decoration or ornamentation, which it doesn't really fit for a lot of design that is appropriate for Carmel. Restrained is good. It says understated and subtle, not excessively showy or ornate, which is good. We like that. It's a little bit judgmental about showy and ornate kind of thing. Suitable is a little bit more of an easier term to use, and it's really clear, right or appropriate for a particular person, purpose, or situation. So if we were to use something like suitable, that might be good because we could, if we were going to say, no, that's not suitable, we could explain exactly why, because it doesn't fit in with the design or the neighborhood or whatever it is that you're trying to say. So next slide, please. So there's been some discussion about organizing by topic. Victoria and Melanie did a fantastic job about, thank you, about taking all of the major elements of the previous design guidelines and putting them underneath as different topics. And we were very excited about that because it made a lot of sense. One of the things that it makes sense for us is that we want to try and limit the size of this. So maybe this will help us reduce redundancies. So that would be great. Also, there are some elements where there's some contradictions where you could argue one side or the other within the same design guidelines. So hopefully that could reduce any contradictions and the size, like I said. Also, this page appears a lot throughout the design guidelines. We'd like to have it deleted for the environment and other things and time. Pictures, I'm sure everybody's going to have different comments about the pictures. In general, like the first photograph, we'd like to make sure that we're using photos that show the architecture that we're talking about, how that architecture fits within the environment, instead of so much dominating by the trees, for example. There's also 2 pictures here in black and white that are very hard to see, and they're really indiscernible. And the last one is also fairly indiscernible too. Its depiction is unclear. Something about views, but we're not quite sure what the picture's trying to say. So we'd like to fix that. Another big one, this is sort of high-level stuff that we like to look at. I know for myself, right now I'm trying to do a remodel, And I'm not sure if my remodel is going to be going before the Historic Review Board, if it's going to need to go to the Planning Commission, or if it gets to be finished in the Planning Department or approved by the Planning Department. So for us who are going to make changes or build or things like that, having a very clear idea of what the process is that goes through and where the authority stops and starts for the different elements. Even if it doesn't have all of the details, if it had some elements of that, that would really help us out, because it will change the way we plan to do things. For example, I don't want to pay an architect a lot of money to plan on doing all these changes that I think would be appropriate and nice to the home if it's going to be historic and then have them redo it again. So that's why we'd like to have that clarified. Also, there's some elements like, interior wall height, maximum 8 feet. That seems kind of silly. This picture here shows an example of overly busy form, but there are 2 other ones on the next page that are similar. So it's kind of unclear about what's busy about it and if it's appropriate. There are some elements about roofs. We'd like to see flat roofs approved with some sort of discussion about what type of designs they're approved for. Traditional designs, hopefully, we'd like to see.
Move your slide forward.
Oh, thank you. There we go. The first one is a flat roof on the top left. That is a traditional home with a flat roof, so we can see that that is appropriate for some situations. Also, the next to the right on the top is a skirt roof that has a flat top, but if you were to see it from the road or down below, you wouldn't know and it would look fine. Also, there are 2 pitches of roof acceptable right now. We'd like to see an allowance for steeper pitch roofs to allow storybook styles, and also Cotswold and other sort of, even French style, can be a much steeper pitch. In fact, the skirt roof with a steep pitch is what the chateau that I did in France had. So that's a good example. The clipped roof, it says that we can't do it. However, we see it here on a traditional craftsman style bungalow. So it is appropriate for certain designs that we see within town. And also it can really break up a large facade. It can help it seem less large and bulky, massive. Okay, here we have an issue that's really upsetting for us. On page 65, under discussing all these different styles around town and through history and all that kind of stuff, they go into quite detail. It says at the very end, however, architects and designers should not feel constrained to these styles. The concern that I would have is, for example, if I wanted to do something outside of this that would be maybe inappropriate for the town, I could use this as an argument to say, well, I shouldn't be constrained to these styles. So if you want to say shouldn't be constrained in some way or another, that's one thing. But I think that, and the people I've talked to believe that this should just be completely removed. We don't want it to nullify our design guidelines or allow designs that are inappropriate for Carmel. There's some other suggestions about faux finishes being okay when they're authentic, having raw concrete be only for structural material, not for finished material on the outside, allowing different types of roof like clay, slate, and concrete to be on different styles of homes because they exist. There's clay and slate on French styles and English styles and so on and so forth. They mix and go in a lot of different ways. The next one is modern influence. There's a reference to this here. And the concern about this is that if we are going to make comments about allowing modern influence, we are worried about really the last line of this description of modern architecture is an embrace of minimalism and a rejection of ornament. So those 2 elements, myself, my neighbors, friends, colleagues, other organizations that I've spoke to, are all very concerned about that. We believe that a rejection of ornament and an embrace of minimalism is not what Carmel is all about. Modesty, yes, absolutely, but not minimalism. Okay, a couple other suggestions. This one's talking about fenestration, and it's not clear. It needs to be clear what they're saying is wrong. Is it the shape of the windows, the shape of the roof, too many windows or whatever? It's not clear. They also say that balconies should be preferred to be on the rear, but we've seen a lot of balconies on the front of homes that's very attractive, so we'd like that taken out. Another picture, the ground covers in page 90 should be a color photo if we're going to be using it for landscaping. And the last issue is this page on 98, gates, fences, and walls. And we're not sure why this is wrong. The rock pillars are low, the wall is low, the gate is wood and it's not solid, and also it's an example of a lot of other gates and walls and pillars in the neighborhood. I walked to town and from town, and I shot about a dozen different homes. These are just a few that I didn't want to put on there, a whole bunch of them. But I really like that one taken out of there, not just because it's my gate.
Was it really?
Is it? That's why we put it in there.
Have we offended you?
Oh, extorted. Well, I got my gate. I don't care.
Get adopted. You got to do it.
But I am, and everybody's really grateful. The community going through this horrible process to get this done. The planning department taking it on. It's a really tough task, and there's a lot of issues around it. So we're very grateful to everybody who's participating, and we hope that this will help create a more harmonious community.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Very well organized. Yeah, appreciate it.
Can we get copies of that?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
I can send you the slides, but there's also this, which is in the.
Yeah, his comment that was included in the comment packet that went out.
Yeah, all the text from the.
But I can send it out to
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.
Slideshows.
Sure. Got it.
But all the text from your slides is in what you sent in as notes, yeah?
Yeah, but I will also put on the steering committee's website a PDF of the slides.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Maybe I'll ask Sarah if she has any comments, just because I don't know who's with whom, but I haven't seen you here yet, Sarah. And we got your note about the trees. So maybe that's your comment, but please tell us what's on your mind.
Well, that's the main thing. When you first read this, it sounds as though trees dictate what happens in Carmel. And I think that it's really important to think that that's fairly recent, having come in 1943. It's a little, that was not an issue. We had views. You could drive down Ocean Avenue and see sweeping views of the ocean. It was absolutely beautiful. That is really one of our most attractive points. The trees are important. I don't know anyone who wants to cut down all the trees. You're talking about it. But I do hear a lot of people saying we do not need another 2,000 trees or whatever figure in if you read. To me, there's not saying there's 4 important parts, there's 5 more, but people are very important in Carmel. Views are important in the bay. Trees are important, and the house is comfortable, the size you want, within a 40 by 100 lot or whatever. So when this starts out saying the forest is, it makes it sound as though the forest is the utmost thing, and I really reject that idea. I think that we need to think of the forest as a part of Carmel, not all of Carmel. And it wasn't until Sense of the Forest developed in 89.
Thank you, Sarah. We haven't spent that much time on this committee talking about the difference between the ocean view and the typical view on a street.
The ocean view used to be a typical view, Victoria.
An inland block view, I might say. So we haven't really distinguished that very much in our conversation, and maybe that's the whole topic we should bring up. But I saw some hands here. Go ahead.
I'm just to carry on from Sarah's point. It kind of reads like, and I agree, it reads like the forest is primary, and then whatever you put on the lot doesn't matter. And I think that we need to look at the design of homes and the style of homes as a primary for the design guidelines, rather than the forest as the design guideline. Partly because we know that as new owners come along, they cut down shrubs and whatnot, things change. We have forest fires, we have storms that change the landscape. So the landscape is temporary, let's put it that way. It evolves, or devolves. And so we really need to be looking at the primary, for me, focus of the design guidelines is not the landscape, and I'm very much into trees, but is the design of the homes. That, to me, seems to be the most important issue. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you, Carol.
at the last meeting, we started talking about frontage, looks on the street, and gates and like that, appropriate, you ended with that. And I suggested that if you want to see example of mistake, go down Casanova between 8th and 9th. And as you go to the 4th house, and you'll see what we call, what you call Fort Casanova. I wonder if anybody did that.
I understood exactly where to go. Sorry.
Okay.
You don't have a photo, do you?
I said the 4th house, I was trying to trick you because the 5th house is the one that you want to look at and it'll stand out. And that was BB, before Brandon, that occurred. So I suggest if you're going to be looking at frontages seriously and gates, do that. And you'll see an example of something that is not appropriate, period, in my humble opinion.
You want to
Take a stroll.
you want to describe it at least, what you think is inappropriate about it?
It's massive, huge beams. It's a carport. Beams maybe 8-10 inches up.
Wood post.
Massive beams across. Fencing. The gate's huge in terms of lumber type, and it's painted kind of a golden oak, and it's right on the street.
It's oversized timbers, is what you're saying. Posts and beams.
I think you could say bridge timbers,
Bridge
but this new lumber. They're the sides.
So this is west side
It's on the west side, 5th house.
from 8th,
From 8th, go down about the middle block.
okay, on what,
I mean, if you miss it,
Casanova.
if you miss it, I got no excuse for you.
Can't be missed.
You can't help it. You can't help it. Okay.
Explain. Yeah, please.
So I have a question and a comment. The comment being that I see a lot of in context with the neighborhood, in context with the neighborhood, and I think we've said in the past that we would like to see that be within the neighborhood and within the village, because I think there are some neighborhoods where some of the modern stuff is snuck in and we don't necessarily need that. Thank you. And then the other thing that I was a little bit confused about is that I have this copy of the guiding principles, and what I see on, for example, page 19 in the commercial guidelines, the guiding principles are different. And so I was confused. Is this not the current copy of the guiding principles from 2723?
See it from here.
Okay.
But I do think that whenever the latest does not make it into the full release. So yeah, I think there is a mismatch.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like a clerical thing. I don't think it's
Yeah, because it read very differently, and I like that better.
Let's make sure we clarify, because the guiding principles are the 6th item.
yes.
That's what you're talking about, Janice? Okay, so in the last meeting with the steering committee, the 6th guiding principles basically remained the same, but there was some slight tweaks to language within each of them. That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, and so I don't know if this is the current,
Okay.
but it
changed from
I
this.
see it. No, that is current. I see it.
That's the current one?
Yeah. Yeah, we just put action verbs. That was a big change.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think Nori was working on it in real time, at the meeting last time.
Yeah.
So maybe they only made it into the residential ones, not the commercial.
So an example. Number 3, keep every built structure modest and simple. It now says keep every built structure within its neighborhood context. We'd like to see that say its neighborhood and the village context.
This one says, fit everywhere within its neighborhood. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I thought it was this other one. So we need to review that. Yeah, we'll make it all reference.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is a separate comment about content that you're making.
Yep.
So there's been 2 comments about the open. The neighborhood is enough to say in order to get the context, and the other has to do with the predominance that we discussed at the beginning, which is something I think we should look at both of those things. I see what we're trying to do, and I don't disagree personally that the design guidelines are primarily about buildings. I think there's been a lot of discussion this year about how forest has been misunderstood by homeowners and maybe not fully, and even the right of way and things like that's not been quite communicated. So, and plus it's the existing condition often when you start a project is the natural site. So, but that maybe it is overemphasized, and certainly the ocean view issue is not addressed. And then the issue of whether it's enough to say neighborhood in order to get, and I just want to make a quick reaction to that I had, which is very similar thing, which is that if we have a new, I think in my opinion, welcome contribution that someone in the public actually made, or maybe it's the planning commissioner that said something like, could we please have language in there that focuses folks on the guidelines instead of their neighbors? Because if you see something that is not in keeping with Carmel, but we have actual language that says, just look down the street and do whatever your neighbor does, and then you're actually contradicting the value of both things.
Right.
And so I think that might be what you all are saying. I might be saying it a different way.
Yes, that's right.
I'm trying to say that precedent is not, good precedent is good, bad precedent is not good. So we don't want to be sending mixed messages throughout the document, which I think is currently the case. Does that capture it?
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if the solution is to add village, because I'm not sure if that's concrete enough, but I do think we are focusing on the same problem. Yeah, and that's a really good point. Okay. Now, can I just see if anyone in besides steering committee members from the Zoom room, and that's, oh, sorry, Neil, I didn't see your hand. So, please.
I wanted to make sure I was last.
Oh, you're not last yet. You're not last yet. If you want to wait for the Zoom.
No,
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
All right. So, anyone from the Zoom room who may not, you don't have a hand up yet, but you can put your hand up. Looking at it from across the room, and it's fairly stated, but on this, I see at least 5 members of the public. No comments yet? You can always, it's not a firm cutoff, unless Neil insists on being last. Go ahead.
Oh, nobody up there?
Not yet.
Several things, but mostly my comments will be about architectural style. Before that, I want to underline the steering committee's focus on organizing this document into a usable format. I do understand Brandon's comment that he needs to include everything. So I think that what he's done is understandable. But I strongly underline the steering committee's efforts to organize this in your principles and in a way that an architect or a designer has an organized, you know what I'm talking about, in their mind. Because this is what you do when you're designing a house. You're going back and forth, hopefully you are, between that document and your design. The more organized those guidelines are, the easier it is to keep it in mind as you design the house. I think that's important to it being used by the designer as well. Okay, so underline that. And then we've got the subject of modern design, modern style, and the name modern architecture. And I noticed here in the draft copy of guidelines here statement, these designs in English Tudor styles were certainly contributors to the character of Carmel. So we are talking about design styles contributing to the character of the city. And yet not once has there been a question sent out to the body, what do you feel are supportive architectural styles to the village of Carmel, and what styles do you feel are not supportive to the village of Carmel? And that seems to me an extraordinary missed opportunity. I also checked the Pacific Grove design guidelines, and they talk about design styles that are supportive of the character of Pacific Grove and design styles that are not supportive. So I assume if we're going to use craftsman and bungalow and so on, we can also use modern style. It's just another one of these styles. And the point is clear that architectural styles have a huge impact on the feeling and character of a village or a city. And so we have not really thrown that out to the body politic.
When you say use modern style, sorry, you mean define it, not necessarily have it, right? That could be misinterpreted.
Okay, what did I miss on there, Cal?
You said we should be using modern style.
Oh, no, yeah, I didn't mean that. We should be able to use the word modern style. I didn't mean that. Yeah, that would not be exactly in keeping with.
Neil surprised you today.
A moment of hope there. And so then that takes us to the letter to the editor. We also had Brandon's comments last Friday in the blog about a particular question that was on the survey that was issued to the residents of Carmel, Design Traditions 1.5 online survey. And we objected to this. The CPA objected this by an official letter to the editor, which you've all read some months ago. And then we made a presentation to the steering committee saying that we felt that the question was not an objective or neutral question. It starts out with an assumption. Quotes, the question 2.2, to what degree do you agree with the following statement? Quotes, a new house can fit in regardless of style if it is subdued in its character, including size, form, materials, and color. In a questionnaire, you don't start out with a statement about what you want them to say yes to. So this is clearly not an objective question to the body politic. So we don't have an accurate reflection of what the public feels about architectural styles. So I would like to see this somehow picked up and incorporated as we go forward from this point. And I'd like to see the question of whether the style is objective or not addressed on a broader level with more people involved in that question. I think I'm going to stop there.
We do have on our agenda, just so everybody knows, next, after guidelines, if we get to it today, thoughts about the joint meeting that is being planned for March. So if there are issues that you feel like have not been, like maybe Sarah's ocean view issue, the issue of style that you feel need to be handled or discussed in a new way, that might be the opportunity. All right, thank you. Okay, rustling. Yes, David.
I have a general question that maybe, people can think about and come back to the table with. And actually from a planning department would be very helpful. What is the benefit of moving towards modern style in our community? Because we, of course, modern is always what is fresh, what is new. And we go back to maybe the 50s, we say, oh, that's when it started or whatever. But if we're not going to be very clear about we don't want modern styles, then I think we all need to understand why we do want them. Is it going to attract more investors? Are more people going to want to build homes here? Are they going to be better homes? You know, what are the reasons? You know, so that I think the people who disagree with the concept can have something to look at and maybe, you know, change their mind about.
Yeah, of course, and then I have a thought too.
So just my initial reaction to that is, I don't know if the intent of the guidelines or the way it's written or any sort of planning documents is saying we're picking one style that we want to move towards. It doesn't, the way I read the guidelines, it doesn't say we're trying to move towards a specific style like modern. It's more about if you're going to build any style, how do you do it to be appropriate within the village? You know, doing analysis of why we would want one specific style, I don't know if that would be appropriate without doing an analysis of why we would want any of the other potential styles, which would be, I don't know how fruitful that would be. Yeah, that's just my initial thought. I don't see it as the guidelines trying to say we're moving towards a specific style. It's more about how do we guide people to build whatever style they want to build appropriately, authentically, subordinately, all the guiding principles that we have in there.
I agree with you. I think that's wonderful, and I think that's a wonderful way to approach it. I guess what I don't understand is this question: why would we want to allow people to build anything that they want to build as long as it's hidden? That question is how a lot of us are interpreting. Yeah. We're interpreting it that way.
I think, the question doesn't use the term hidden. I think it uses the term subordinate.
Subordinate.
Yeah, which is very different than hidden. So subordinate, you still see something when it's subordinate. It plays nicely with everything around it, basically. It's part of the environment. Hidden means you can't see it at all. Mm-hmm. So I don't think any part of this is trying to say, the steering committee, I'm probably overstepping here, but I don't think any part of this is trying to hide things. We're not trying to hide good or bad architecture in the village. We're trying to make sure that it fits, that it's subordinate. Subordination is more about fitting than hiding.
Okay.
And that's why that term subordinate was used and not hide. Like, the question isn't if we hide a modern architecture in the village, is it okay? The question is, can any style fit as long as it's subordinate with its surroundings?
But if I may step in on this, there has been a feeling that I have had listening to David right now, that there have been several attempts to derail this discussion of modern style architecture. We began to feel, we heard this months before the meetings, even the steering committee, we heard city council say, well, it has nothing to do with architectural style. As long as the setting and what's around it and the landscaping, all of that is good, it doesn't matter the style of the house. So there was the principle put forward. And now it was carried, and then it was further elaborated with this question. Yes. Can fit in regardless of style, if subdued in its character, including size, form, materials. So this is a general attempt on the part of certain people to make the style issue irrelevant so that nobody will talk about it when we all know that it matters. And so this is why we felt that the push on landscaping was maybe a little oversized, size of the subject compared to the buildings. And we thought that maybe the reason for that was it's a way of getting away from this, talking about modern style architecture. I hope I didn't.
Well, I guess
that's your point.
No, I respect what you're saying. That's I hear a lot of people talking like that. Yeah, I guess from my perspective is that, we're talking about the size, the form, and the materials and the color. Well, that's all the stuff that we're talking about in the design guidelines. Regardless of all of that, if it's subdued, I mean, we can bypass all the design guidelines if it's subdued, subordinate and subdued. Yeah. So this type of concept.
I see the question. I don't recall it that way, but I also, David, I like your question about why modern, and I want to take a stab at it, not to defend anything that we've all found objectionable about some of the newer buildings. I would never do that. I am personally offended as an architect and as a citizen of some of the, what I think we would all call modern in some way, that has been built. But I believe that, I used to teach a course on Frank Lloyd Wright, or help teach a course. And he started becoming a modernist around the turn of the century in Illinois. The building out here on the point is, I think, representative of what early modernism in America was about, which was how do you connect, it was a very Jeffersonian idea, how do you connect families to nature?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very different than European modernism, which was a very, it became a sort of corporate type of modernism here in America.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much more urban,
Mm-hmm.
it's sleeker. We have a mix, of course, now all over the world. But I believe, personally, just so you know, you asked why would modernism be a good thing in Carmel? Well, there's lots of it here. Most of it that's successful, I think, is the stuff from that original American conception
Mm-hmm.
of modernism,
Yeah,
which is about connecting to nature
absolutely.
and coordinating to nature.
Yeah.
And a lot of the buildings we have here that are quintessential, some of them historic, Neil and Carol and I met in one of them that was sort of expressive modernism, but very natural. It was a raw, unfinished wood building, not very large, subordinate to the forest. And I think that's, to me, that's the answer to your very nice, sort of innocent question. Is there anything redeeming that we would actually want about modernism? I think that the original impetus in America for it was very pure in that way, and it's completely in keeping with the values of Carmel, in my opinion. As an architectural historian to some degree, but a designer myself, and also an observer of Carmel. That said, there's plenty of stuff that does not fit that description that people call modern here.
Is there a way for us to clarify that in our design guidelines? Because I think that's the essence of all of the debate. You know, we all agree that Frank Lloyd Wright's home is beautiful. You know, we love that. And I think a lot of us are in the community, I'm not speaking for the Carmel Preservation Association, but a lot of us in the community are open to that kind of thing and seeing new homes that are kind of like that, you know. So if we could get that a little bit more clarified, you know, and get that clear in there that, you know, what was the term that you used in regards to his style?
I don't know now.
Jeffersonian.
Well, that was his political philosophy.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
People were connected to the land. That was an American, was an anti-urban mentality.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Because the things that we're most against are the ones that look like they're urban.
I wonder if, so as you're talking, I wonder if the steering committee thinks about this, and I know Nora can hear it. Maybe because, you know, this modern architecture thing has sparked so many conversations and concerns with the community. Maybe there's a special note in the guidelines, a note about modern architecture in the village, like this type of stuff that maybe helps quell some of those fears about the borderline brutalist type of modern architecture we see down, like on the corner of Monteverde at night. You know, I don't, you know, no shade on that because it got approved through the process, but I'm not sure that when this is all said and done, the guidelines would allow that project to be approved in the future. And I think that's one of the goals of this.
Mm-hmm, right.
So I'm offering that as a suggestion, maybe the steering committee, maybe we think about a special note somewhere, a note about modern architecture in the village of Carmel-by-the-Sea. I don't know.
Oh, just on top of that, so I was speaking with Stephen, my neighbor who's an architect. They just did a mid-century modern house. And that was one of his big concerns in the design guidelines. He said everything seems to stop at like 1960 or something like that. So, of course, in the realm of, you know, the Carmel Preservation Association, that's a good thing. I'm speaking from myself, you know, and from my neighbors. We would prefer things to stay, you know, more like they were way in the past because that's what brought us here, most of us, you know, the charming stuff. But if we can explain why or why not the styles that went on from there that are not appropriate, you know, or something like that, because people, Neil says this to me a lot, you know, people talk in regards to design styles. You know, what kind of style is your house going to be? You know what I mean? So, I mean, the architects, I think they like to mix, match, and try different things, and that's cool. That's creative. But I think that the general public is really going to respond to it if we can kind of get some some definition. You know, we talk about the I can't remember the exact terms, but the style of Carmel or the historic charm or whatever. There's some lines in the existing design guidelines that refer back to it. But the only thing that we got close enough to that is I think the 12 different images of the different homes with their styles on the 2 different pages. That was the closest that we got. But is that inclusive? Is it take everything that we're accepting, or is it, should we have some bad examples? You know, maybe not from town, but.
I'll see. I see a hand up on the Zoom, if that's okay. Eric, you're the first Zoom person stepping in.
Hi there. No, I just wanted to, I guess, pipe up a little bit to defend modernism. I appreciate what Victoria said about it. I think one of the main things she said that's important to understand about it in making the case for it is the connection to nature. And our village is one of the most beautiful places on earth. And so I think a lot of people that come here, I know I certainly did when I came like 35 years ago, the idea of, you know, forcing people into a house that has very small little windows or has very little connection to the yard and the outside, it seems very frustrating and totally a missed opportunity to how we want to live, or some people want to live. And so I just think there is an issue of allowing, you know, when you say styles and you say, okay, we have to meet these styles, individuals that come to Carmel may not want to live in certain things. I mean, modernism is also about a lifestyle in some ways, and that connection to the outside and and to nature. And sensitive modernism, ones that keep the character Carmel and modernism and the good modernism, part of that.
Ron,
Sorry.
Eric, I'm guessing you can probably hear us now.
Did you hear any of that?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
We're having some tech problems. Just sorry, Eric.
We tried a new microphone setup today, and so when we release you to talk, it creates feedback. So Sebastian's working on it.
We'll just pause for one moment.
Sure.
If anyone else in the Zoom room wants to prepare thoughts. I don't see anyone else with their hand up.
Hi, this is Stephen Englum on the Zoom call. Thanks for the dialogue. I just put some comments in the chat.
Feedback.
Is that still giving feedback?
I wasn't quite done either, so.
Oh, go ahead. Sounds like it might be solved.
Okay. Victoria, is it okay to talk? Oh, I can't hear you now. Can you hear me? I lost the audio. Oops. There he goes. I can hear him now.
Eric, if you start from the beginning, and I'm gonna turn off the audio from here, but then you're gonna start from the beginning. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, you got that.
From the beginning, I still hear it, the feedback. There you go. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and speak then. I was just beginning to start talking about modernism, and there's been kind of quite a bit of bad mouthing of modernism. And I wanted to just agree with some of the things that Victoria had said. And one of the most important things about it that makes it work so well with our community is how it can connect to nature. And when I moved here 35 years ago, there wasn't a lot of it, or there was a lot of more historic styles that were being built out of scale. and kind of creating a McMansion effect. And I think a lot of people felt that I knew, and I felt this as well, is that our village is such a beautiful piece of nature, and using a modern style that allows you more easily to connect to it is totally makes sense. And I think a lot of people felt that, being in a small house with tiny windows that were based on some historic style rather than something that's related to the natural context is a little frustrating. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be allowed, may love that stuff, may love living in that stuff, but I guess I would make the argument that a lot of people don't feel that way. And when you have individuals coming to Carmel who want to experience nature, doing it within, sensitive modernism, warm modernism that fixed the character of Carmel, and that has really been part of the character of Carmel since, for 100 years, that needs to be acknowledged and allowed, I would say. So I would, and I also think modernism has a particular power in its authenticity because it speaks more to how people want to live today. And again, that's not forcing anybody to live in a modern house, but I don't think you should force people to live in a storybook house either. The other thing I just wanted to mention, I do have a lot of comments on the guidelines, so I guess I may just write those down and send them in to the committee. But I think one thing Carmel is especially known for, and I didn't really see it, I guess it could be considered dangerous to put it in the guidelines, but I find a lot of the great houses in Carmel are kind of expressing some individuality and an eccentricity and whimsicalness that is really an expression of the creativity of their owners. You see that, so obviously starting with Comstock and some of his storybook cottages. You see it in things like the Bark House, but you see it in the Frank Lloyd Wright House. You see it in the Mark Mills houses, or some of the houses by John Thotis that I worked with. These, I think, really do express the interesting creativity of the artistic community of Carmel. And I want to make sure, or I hope the guidelines acknowledge that in some way. So thank you.
Okay, I think I might figure this out. Okay, at least we can talk to him here. We're going to have an echo, but thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. I think we got it that time. Really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna.
Do you want to go to Mary Ann?
Mary Ann?
Mary Ann, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you. I sent commentary to Brandon, and I think it's too tedious to walk this through in the public forum. But the gist of it is that I think that the pictorial material is incredibly powerful and useful, and that needs more thought of what we select for, or what is being selected as visuals, and also then maybe the visuals should have some copy, because I think somebody earlier mentioned already that there's some images in there and you don't actually know. It says this roof is too busy, but frankly, it's not that bad. There are much more busy roofs in town, and with different pitches and so on. And so I think trying to spend more care in selecting the images is really important. And I think that maybe, I know there is a count of mid-century homes, for example, for Carmel. Maybe these different styles that we're talking about should also be somehow proportionally presented in the design guidelines. So we actually have a very large inventory of mid-century homes, and we have quite a large inventory of relatively modern homes or modern interpretations of the cottage that do not stand out because they are done very well. And so I think it would be useful to look at those and include those in the pictorial material. Thank you.
If it's okay, is this?
You just say which one. Say.
Thanks, Marianne.
So do you want to see if anyone else on the Zoom wants to comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
Is Eric still?
Sorry, I left my hand up, but I was completed, so I can't hear anything either. So I'll mute myself again.
I want to compliment Brandon and the committee. In the previous meetings, you put yourself in a position where you're talking at the public. You found a format that works here today. You're working with the public. I think that is terrific. What we're doing is getting questions on the table, and one person feels this way about the answer, somebody else feels different, and we're coming together. Good job. I'm appreciative, because the other meetings I felt way over here, and I feel in this time. And so I hope that when you meet with the Planning Commission, you do the same thing. Planning Commission, the committee, we'll sit back there wherever. But I think this is a great format, and good job.
Thank you for that. We are obviously working out the kinks, but we've always wanted to do this. We just couldn't because of the Zoom technology. And
But don't you love modern science? It works so smoothly.
Exactly. So let's, if you don't mind, let's take it to the steering committee so we don't lose Marianne. It's very hard, obviously, to deal with the Zoom anyway, and with Austria and the audio, but I just want to make sure maybe she's finished, but this way you guys get a chance to react to whatever gets said now by the steering committee. So it's more of a dialogue. But Marianne, I know you had a very good comment about the photos. Other people have mentioned the photos. I don't know if you can hear me, but do you have any other categories of comments that you want to make? And we do have your comments in writing that are on the table over there. Go ahead, Doug.
Are we co-mingling commercial and residential as we give our comments, or do you want to stick with residential?
I don't see why we can't commingle unless it gets unwieldy. Are you leaving us there?
No, we'll play tennis.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm so sad. So Marianne,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Sarah. Marianne, is there, there you are. Any other categories before we lose you? And I'm not sure what time that is, but.
Sorry, did you hear me? No. I will chat. I will enter things in the chat if I want to add a comment, because I can't tell whether I'm heard or not.
So Marianne, we can hear you. So go ahead and just say what you want to say.
Okay, thank you. I said that I will enter a comment into the chat box if I do have a comment.
Okay, yeah, we can keep all the chat as a note for the meeting. So if we can go back on those. But,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I tried to connect that so I could see if she has comments in chat.
Takes a village. Have a conversation. Okay. So let's
it someday. Don't worry too much.
You're doing great, Sebastian.
It's an experiment.
It's okay.
So thin, each one all over.
In the residential, we have various needs. Reference the need to talk about compounds. Not compounds like Menlo Park and Saratoga, places on the East Coast are having. Nothing in here about compounds. Third is we seem to be on the cusp of house numbers. I want to have some reference in here because that could be part of the design, depending on who the architect is. That item. On the commercial, sections on utility boxes, backflow preventers, etc. really needs to be done. There's no reference to dark skies. It needs to be more emphasis on property owners, shop owners, putting in planters, flower boxes at their entrance. The tradition in the city going back to the 20s with Mayor Fraser and Mayor John Jordan around to encourage people to put flower boxes and planters in front of their stores. Referencing it. We don't have any reference to tile. That has been an architectural tradition downtown. Cypress Inn and
decorative tile.
Pardon?
Decorative tile.
Decorative tile.
Yeah.
Using tile on the Fortain building, Lawrence and Ocean. There's no.
Doug, sorry, you're saying to encourage it?
Or at least we reference it.
Okay.
And that's not to build a building out of it, to at least have some ornamental tile. There's not much discussion about storm drain planters downtown. That's probably an item that's going to be coming from the Water Resources Board, and we ought to be in front of it. For both the residential and commercial, this form, I think we need a separate element separating the private domain from the public realm. That one's not working. Street furniture, for an example. What are we going to do about street lights? The ones we have are 60 years old. Barney Loyola put them in. They're going to need to replace. Are we going to address that? But that's a public domain. That's not a private. Most of the guidelines deal with the private domain. Same with landscaping. So maybe we have a commercial, a residential, and a public design guidelines. Some further things on the commercial. We talk about, there's a section on street level interest. I think street level interest for a shop is different than street level interest if you have a hotel or an inn. Maybe we need to talk about special criteria for hotel rooms that are at street level. You walk along Mission Street and the Coachman's Inn, and right there's just hotel room windows. Maybe we ought to talk about those have to be a certain height above the ground, rather than you just walk by and look in people's rooms. Let's see, we talked about tiles. There's way too many photographs of the Mary Dummage building on the southwest corner of Ocean and Dolores. That seems to be the prototype for different elements in here. It's way overdone. Security, the Mary Dummage building, Ocean and Dolores, southwest corner. Security devices, that section needs to be beefed up. Parking lots. You should add some stronger language about landscaping and the type of walls and wall materials. Victoria has long battered around the subject of R1 homes in the commercial zone, and that's referenced on page 58.
You have a comment about what needs to be done with that?
Well, I think we ought to take it out. I mean, I don't think there ought to be residential homes in the commercial districts. New ones, right, new ones. And then there are some items that need further consideration in the commercial, downtown drainage ponds, streetlight fixtures, more emphasis on hiding rooftop equipment, and addresses as well as in the residential, if we in the future have addresses.
You have all that written down, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to write it.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
are my comments.
So I'm gonna grab, before you start talking, Don, because I guess the little, perfect, Doug. There you go.
Yes, Doug and I went through this together. And we talked about the organization of the document, and I think there's been a lot of discussion between several of us, including Brandon. The first point that Doug listed, which he didn't mention, was first 19 pages cluttered. The document could be an appendix. I think we need to get straight to the design guidelines, and all the other stuff can be a kind of appendix, otherwise it gets lost. We talked about wayfinding. I think wayfinding means it hits you right up front what we're after, and that's why I think we just need to have the guidelines spelled out, and all the other things are backup material so it can follow all of that. There's various inconsistencies in the material. On page 31, it talks about the Cypress Inn. Shows it as a good example, I think. Page 32 talks about something that contradicts that, which is new buildings can be broken up into different styles. That is a dynamite point, I think, that should be eliminated. In the guidelines, in fact, I went through the old guidelines last night and the new one, looking for the term cohesive, which we've bandied about sometimes. The guidelines that guiding principles end up with design every property with authentic and consistent details. That's very good, and that covers residential. What about large properties? There's where I think we need a statement that design large properties to project a cohesive whole. That's exactly what Cypress Inn is. And if we had that, we would avoid all this terrible mishmash that's come as proposals for the pit. All sorts of mixed up stuff, rather than modeling something like the Cypress Inn. And finally, from the very beginning, we talked about a checklist, and I think that's what our guiding principles are. But I think it'd be much more explicit as an introduction to that, introductory paragraph of that, to say, this is the checklist that staff is going to use to evaluate your proposal. And I think we can just be much more explicit about that. So those are my key points.
Overview point. Thank you, Don.
Don, you want to pass the little one with the green light? The other one there. Pass that down.
Thank you, Don. I agree with everything that you said. Excellent points, especially when we get to the organization, talk about the organization of the document, and also when we talk about the checklist. We've spent almost a year, and one of the very, very important points we've made consistently is that we want a streamlined, cohesive, terse document. We want to eliminate a lot of what was done in the past with the excess verbiage, the inconsistencies that have been mentioned many times, and have a more streamlined document that is user-friendly for architects, for builders, for the public, and for our staff, and the City Council, and the Planning Commission. And unfortunately, that's not what the draft is, and I appreciate, Brandon, your comment that you're going to do some serious, hopefully, streamlining of this document. I was very disappointed, I have to say, with
what we were given, because there was just too much information. I go to Don's comment that we need a lot of that introductory information in an appendix for someone who wants to read it, or in a side document for maybe new residents, new designers, new builders who are not familiar with the history. I think the historical aspect that's been brought up is extremely important, but I agree with Don that it needs to be someplace else. The whole first part of this document needs to be, like an introduction to Carmel. Putting it in the design guidelines, I can understand why, people thought it was important to do this. However, I think all it does is get us back to where we were before, that we need an extremely streamlined document here. And I felt a great deal of frustration trying to wade through the document, because I just felt it wasn't organized the way that it would be best translatable to the public and all the entities that I've already listed. So with that in mind, we had a good working situation getting the 6 key principles together. And so I expressed my frustration to Victoria, because we had already worked on the 6 guiding principles and then tried to get those honed in and bring them back to the steering committee in general. And so what we did is we took what was in the document, and we, Victoria and I.
My name is Roberta.
Yeah. I don't know, there's something in my brain. I've never done that before, but all of a sudden in the last week.
No, you called me Roberta several times.
No, I said.
I know.
Oh, so anyway, there's something you trying. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take Roberta.
Yeah. It was a good thing. But anyway, so what we did is we put together. Over the last 10 days, we took the 6 guiding principles, and then what we did is we incorporated all of the information that was basically in the new document and reformatted it to go along with the 6 key principles. And we landed up with a document that's like 22 pages. And what we've done is the organizational aspect. We have not done the verbiage, the content document part of the document. So we can come back with that at a later point. But the point being in general is that we felt that being consistent with what the committee has said all along about streamlining the document, making it more user-friendly, getting rid of excess verbiage, contradictions, redundancies, everything that you all have mentioned. I mean, we're keenly aware of that, and we are all, the 4 of us and Marianne abroad, we're trying to accomplish that first for with one subcommittee of our larger committee. Don and Doug are working very, very hard on the design guidelines for the commercial district, and Roberta. I'm just going to put an R on you. It was Victoria. God, I'm going to get you one, dear. Victoria and I are working on the residential, because 200 pages was just too much for us to really do our very, very best on. And at least I was quite surprised. I don't know about the rest of my compadres, but I was very surprised to see what was put out in the commercial, for the commercial guidelines for us to review in the opening of the handout, the draft. And, so,
Melanie, can I let me step in for 1 second?
Sure.
I had, Melanie, as everybody knows, Melanie and I had an encounter in the parking lot after one of our meetings and ended up going home and trying to see if these 6 principles would serve us. And I have to say that honestly, I could not wade through, and I am in awe, David, that you read it 3 times. Around it, having, had these discussions about clarity and organization and how to see the environment, like, and maybe we could, I don't know, we'll get back to that, but, just sort of see from the big context down to the detail and the logic of that. I could not wrap my head around the fact that I was seeing detailed information all over the document, and I had never looked at, obviously I looked at this thing for years to find things relevant to a particular project when I was on the planning commission, et cetera. I had never looked at the document really as a whole, trying to see if it's holding together in terms of ease of use. And so I, for myself, just started, and then Melanie came over and I asked her to look at it too, tried to sort of distill what have always been, I think, the kind of key directives that were in the original document and that are primarily still here in the revised document with some extra background information, which we all seem to agree is useful but needs to not be up front. I just took all that stuff and put it in the back personally so I could evaluate the document. I have to say I haven't been able to get around to evaluating the document quite yet. But I did take all of the existing language that you could classify as a directive and put it under the 6 principles. And then Melanie weighed in with a thought of, it's basically just an outline. I mean, that's all it is. It's saying, like, if you have 1.0 for principle, for example, about the forest, thank you, Brandon, then you can have a sub-principle of 1.1.0 and then 1.1.1. And it's not that it has to stay like this, but it was a working tool for us to just try to wrap our heads. And then Melanie was able to go a little further with content, but I really never got there. But I did, after Brandon and I talked yesterday about how to keep this kind of on the organizational level or the higher level, I did make copies for the steering committee. Oh, good. Today, or I didn't make copies, the staff did. But just so that, you can see the sort of distilled directive part in isolation, really, and see if it helps to, and there's a couple copies here that you guys can take home. It's also on the steering committee website as of late last night. So I wasn't necessarily planning on distributing, but I just thought, if we're going to have this discussion, you can see at least how I'm working through it in my own mind, and how Melanie has been helping me with that. Really just like a working tool. So let me just describe this. Again, there's nothing in this, and you'll see this on the pages, that has been altered in terms of words. So this is the original content of the draft we got on the 9th, just streamlined into residential is 22 pages and the commercial is 11 pages. And that's half pages because it's just one column on the side. So I don't know, it's probably half that. The residential is probably 11 pages of words. But anyway, obviously, I was also trying to find the photos that, and please forgive, it's just complete. It's really just a final working document. It's not like ready for prime time or, but I don't want any people to not know how I'm working on it or how Melanie and I are working on it. But I found things like on page 11 of the residential, 3.1.3 is under fit every built structure to its context. This is an example of what I think is unwieldy or unfair to our community in terms of, having to figure out where to look for information. So this is a wonderful concept about staggering the front yard, the 3.1.3. But it says this is like a grouping process. This idea of staggering the front yards is mentioned. I've got like 6 or 7 instances I was just underlining from throughout the document. It's an incredibly important concept, I think. I think that's a fantastic diagram, but it really only needs to be made clear one time so that people don't have to search for it in different spots or lose track of where it is. I also just put a plug in for the diagram above it. I think this is one of the best diagrams in this entire document. I'm just going to say that because I like it so much. This is about showing how buildings respond to one another in order to preserve open space and the feeling of the forest going through our village. And it's about looking at your neighbor in a way to build off the neighbor's property as a cohesive design project for a street. I think it's brilliant. And so I don't want stuff to get lost all over the document. I want there to be like a single source for each concept. And so I was not able to process all this information without doing this organizational kind of outline version. But again, please forgive, you have to realize that there is not a single word in here that has been altered. So things don't make sense next to each other necessarily. You know, they don't necessarily flow, but it is kind of grouping like things with like things so that I could at least start to have a bigger view of what's going on. So I did that with commercial and with residential, and Melanie was kind enough to comment on maybe the usefulness of putting these subs. So it's also a matter of, so I felt like in this community we've come to this notion of going from the big context down to the detail, which luckily follows the way you design a building. It follows the way you get your building approved. You know, you start with something, big concepts about the building, and then you don't have to come to the planning commission with your details till later, then that's the last thing. So that I think works. But even within each of the 6, or maybe there'll be 5, I don't know how many we'll end up with, principles, it's important, I think, to funnel information in that way also, so that there's a big principle for each general topic that we agree on, and then there are sort of sub-principles about how you support that big concept, and then there are sub-details about how you get that done. And I think, again, that is the way that folks, I think, tend to research new information. They look at big ideas, and then they say, well, how would I execute that? And they sort of drill down. So I would hate to see all this good work lost in random places, being repeated, et cetera. So to me, this was useful. I have to take another look at it now. I didn't want anyone to, I didn't want to keep it a secret, I guess, especially when we're trying to talk about big ideas and big thoughts about illustrations, big thoughts about organization. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, but Melanie was referring to this exercise, and I just wanted to show you what she was referring to.
It's good to pass it out.
Yes, go ahead.
Page 13, 14, and 15, there are cross out.
Are you on the residential? You know, by the way, this is online. Thank you for the question, Doug. Online on the steering committee, I not only have my working copy, this one, but also a even earlier version that.
How many pages are in the residential? I'm sorry to interrupt.
22.
Okay, the copies you handed out only have 11 pages.
Oh, but is that commercial?
So I've got only.
Where's the residential?
Oh,
here.
Here's the residential. I need a copy of it.
I don't know. I think we met. They made enough for steering and you, but I think it got.
Yeah, these are residential. I don't think we realized there was. So did everybody get a copy of both? I don't know.
No, Brandon, I need a copy of commercial. Thank you.
There's one right
Oh, wow.
So, it's all online also. So what I was going to say, good question, Doug.
What was the question?
The question that Doug was wondering about some of there's the crop houses that are on 13 and 14 on residential. So let me explain myself again. Online, you will also see the earlier version of this. So again, I went through this document repeated times to sort of distill it so I could digest it. And one of the version before this not only has every single word the same, it also has all the original fonts, colors, italics, everything. So if you go on, I don't have a color printer, so I didn't print that version. But if you go online, you can also view it online so that you will see all of the consultant and the staff's original fonts. Sorry, the font style is different, but the boldings, the reds, the formatting of the font. So this version takes that out for my own sanity, so that I could read it, just plain text. But to answer your question, Doug, the strikeouts, I think either were original to it or possibly were my looking at the very original document and saying, this looks like we've really eliminated a section here that was of interest to me. That's all, from the old document. So it could be that, and I apologize that I'm not quite sure. So for example, 4.4.0 on page 15 says avoid the use of synthetic materials. That I think was from the old thing. It might have been crossed out in the February 9th draft, and I might have thought, you know what, that's useful to be able to see that still. I don't know.
When you say old thing, which old thing do you mean?
By old,
the 25-year-old guidelines or
yes,
the first draft?
Yes, the very old guidelines.
You put some stuff from the 25-year-old guidelines on top of the draft stuff that came out in the first draft?
I think that this was crossed out in the new draft, but I'm not sure. And I have to say, again, this is an internal working document. So if you see something struck out, it may be iffy. I don't know why it's there.
This is totally rough and open.
It's just how do we get my head around? Melanie and I were struggling to get our heads around how to evaluate the document. So we ended up just trying to put like with like, basically.
But just from this newest draft.
Yeah.
This is all just wording from the newest draft.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, I think that was what you were wondering.
Yeah. Right. Although, to Doug's point, it is possible, and I will apologize if it's misleading, if you see something struck out, it might have been a note from me to myself. So, for example, on the bottom of page 5, I don't even know if where this is from. Engineer the drainage pattern to retain water on site. All struck out. I have no idea if that was in the current draft. So just look with suspicion on anything that is struck out. I don't know, and it's overwhelming, frankly. So I apologize for not. But everything else is without doubt, except for the cover page, which is my own index for myself. And by the way, online, these will jump to the page. I learned that about my program. That was exciting for me. Anyway, so...
Could I ask kind of a dumb question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Possibly. And this is, I'm asking this question sort of on behalf of Nori and myself as more of a process question. So I probably I must have missed it last time. I didn't realize you guys were dividing yourself into subcommittees and breaking it up and reviewing this and doing all this. So I apologize if that was stated last time. I missed that. So what's the ultimate goal with what you guys are producing in your subcommittees?
Well, we're not, it was very unofficial. These guys said they wanted to work on commercial, and I think it's very hard to do this on your own, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I assume you all were working as a team.
Yeah.
Very, very hard.
Definitely cross-reference. Yeah.
It's very hard to go through this. I felt very bad for Marianne off in Austria. Frankly, I don't know if she feels bad, but I found it overwhelming. And so because Melanie and I had accidentally fallen into this thing, I called her and asked her for her thoughts on this. These guys said they wanted to work on commercial together. They had a lot of observations over the year on commercial, and I think it's good to have a buddy.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was, it was totally
informal. The question is more
informal.
about, so are the subcommittees going to prepare something similar for commercial and residential that we're going to make a suggestion, like as we go through the process here, like with the community meeting, and ultimately saying this is what we want to do for that. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how this dovetails in the process that we're heading.
I don't think it's a good question, and it may be related to our next agenda item, but I didn't, this was just a working document for me.
Okay.
But I don't have any, it's probably up to the community, to the steering committee to decide if this has any use going forward. It has helped me have some overall observations.
So at this point, they're really these are more like digestion tools.
They are digestion tools. That's a very good question.
That's helpful to understand, because I wasn't sure if we're looking at like proposed redrafting necessarily at this point. There's certainly going to be redrafting, like we said at the onset. Yeah. The formatting is going to change, but that's helpful. Okay, so these are just tools you guys have used so far for yourself to help bite off the elephant one piece at a time.
That's right.
Yeah, but what I think too is that we brought this up today because it fulfills one of the goals that we've had to simplify this document. And
it could. I don't think it does yet.
No, but I'm saying the formatting is a way that makes it very user-friendly. The other document, 200 and some pages, 200 pages, is not user-friendly to anybody necessarily. It's just too verbose, it's too long, and we need to streamline, and we've said that from the beginning. And so, we came up with this approach to see what you all thought, both the steering committee and the public, to see and get input from you, and deliberately we haven't had time, because this takes an inordinate amount of time, and Victoria has been incredible on the computer putting all of this together. But this is an attempt to see if we can do something very streamlined and if it works. And so that's what we would like, is all of you to look at it, steering committee compadres, as well as all of you out, in the public, and see if we can, where we can go.
But again, I don't think that I think aggregating this material in this format is this is just a working, this cannot be used.
Yeah,
as far as I can.
No, it's just the organization.
I get it.
Is it promising? That's a good question.
The question or sort of thought that I have was something we should all think about as we're doing this exercise, is think about, if I'm a designer or a staff member of the city or the planning commissioner who's using this, if I have a project I'm trying to review, let's just take windows, for example, or a fence or something like that. Am I going to be able to use this document to say, okay, here's the section that talks about windows, or here's the section that talks about fences, or am I going to have to go through and look at different sections to talk about the same design topic? And maybe that's okay, but that's what we need to think about when we're doing the reorganization, is are we focusing on entering the document with trying to design an aspect of a project so we can get to a specific thing, or do we want to enter the document and think about the principles and make sure we check all the principles for the specific design topic we're trying to address? So I think that's what you're talking about, Victoria, like this, maybe the usability of this is something we need to look at, because people will go to the design guidelines and try to say, okay, what do the design guidelines say about how I do a fence on a property, or how do I do lighting on a property? So we need to think about that too.
Yep. And I think when it's just jumbled of here we have a document where the content does not match the form. It's a different format, a format that, in my mind, worth testing, but also was helpful to me to understand tiers of design, basically, starting big and then heading down into the small. If it can't do what you're saying, Brandon, if you can't find something that's on a topic that you need to see, then it needs to be worked on, I think. I don't have any preconceptions about whether
it came out right now. It's a draft anyway, so we know that hasn't changed. Either way.
Right. I mean, I don't have any preconceptions about. I think it's an experiment. Not only is it an experiment, it's a tool to see if this can advance or not, I don't know. I mean, but it was something I felt personally like I had to do in order to even digest, as I said. Carol, you have your hand up. Sorry.
I'm just thinking it might actually address Brandon's concerns well to use those principles, whether there are 6 in the end or not, because right now it feels like windows are spread all through the whole document. So it's really hard to find information. Whereas if you organize it by the 6 and have the subheadings where you can see, well, there's windows, and you have eliminated the redundancy, which is, as we all know, is terrible in this former document. It seems to me it would be much simpler and easier to find your topic organized in this way. But
I wish I had it. I don't have my paper copy in front of me. I thought that the first draft actually does break it down by topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a great deal to do here and to decide on. What I was surprised at when I, was reformatting, that when we took just the directed, so I actually went through the captions, I went through the side essays, I went through all the different multiple categories of information on each page, and anytime anything was a new piece of information that was not covered in, I'll call them the directives that tend to be more sort of clear statements in both the old draft, the old version, and the current draft. I didn't find that much new content in the sidebars, but if I did, I tried to integrate it so I could see it next to related information. So if there was a little note about a window, for example, if we're talking about windows, that was in a caption, I thought, oh, actually that's not covered in the directives. And sometimes I would even find in the caption a directive. You must do this with your window, for example. And it was absent in the so I'd say, okay, well, there's a caption that's very powerful and is not just clarifying the diagram. It's actually something that the city is proposing should be done. So then I would put it next to whatever else was very similar. So again, the jumble still, it's a different type of jumble. It's a different.
I think one of the things maybe, sorry, because I'm looking at like page 77 of the draft. So the heading at the top of page 77 is Windows. So the preceding sections are specific to Windows. But I think maybe to the point that, and one of the things Victoria and I had talked about is a tool might be, at the end of this whole document, you have like these, like in the CEQA guidelines or other regulatory documents, there's a list of terms. So like you have at the end, if you want to learn about Windows, there's this list and it tells you which pages or which sections it exists on. You can click on it and it takes you right to it. Because it is right now broken up by design topics. I'm sure Windows might appear somewhere else in the document, so I think that would be helpful. And maybe, key design topics, maybe they need to be added into the original, like at the start of the residential guidelines. There's the pages of things that are happening, and it's not as specific.
Let's talk about Windows again in another way. There's a whole section, always has been, both earlier and now, on privacy. And privacy is a very big concept to me, because we are talking about, in fact, Melanie and I had this chat about views versus privacy. Views are also really important. We heard someone talk about it today. So these are actually in some ways opposite things that you're trying to balance, views and privacy. When you talk about Windows with respect to privacy, you really, there's many things, not many, but a handful of things about size of windows, orientation of windows, being respectful of your neighbor, offsetting windows. So like, that's not about window design. That's about privacy. So it really doesn't matter in that moment to talk about windows being wood, or windows being authentic, or being compatible with the style. At that point, you're really not talking about windows, you're talking about privacy, even though the word window is mentioned. So that's an example where, and I'm making this up off the top of my head, so I don't know if you go to the Windows section now,
No, it doesn't. I mean,
if it talks about privacy or not.
This is about the actual style, math, human scale,
Materials?
Yeah, materials.
It's important to me that the idea of a window isn't just like, if it says the word window, it's in a section. If it's about privacy, then the window information needs to be under privacy, in my view, because it's a much more important concept than how you detail a window, which is at the very end of a project.
And if we did that sort of glossary at the end, where you see oftentimes just the, window, comma, materials.
Right.
On page 2, windows, comma, privacy on this page.
Right.
So maybe that's a way to help.
Hyperlink.
Yeah.
Very good.
David has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I just did a search on this book, draft windows, and there are 12 different pages to show it. So it would be great somehow, figure out a different way to organize it.
Yeah, putting it together.
Again, please don't take this for more than it is. It's really my own internal processing of my brain with help from Melanie. And
it was so helpful when you guys did this last time. So thank you very much for doing that.
And also, about linking, and I think you and I spoke about this on the phone, but just because it's now on the table, I personally prefer links that are integrated into the text. If every word was a hyperlink, that'd be fine with me. You can hover over and see what's a hyperlink and what's not, and automatically, there's more information about this thing I'm currently reading about. The exercise of going to a sidebar and saying, I wonder if these links are relevant to what I'm reading about. I don't know. Should I click on them or not? When they're integrated into the text, that they're on the topic you're reading about. That's another comment I should make.
So the boxes, maybe you're too busy?
So at
least the call-out boxes, not the images.
It's more the opposite, that the opposite approach is, to me, much more useful. So, for example, and then there's another caveat I should have explained, but there are underlines in this that were not in the original document. Those are most of them are my underlines, because whenever I saw something like land use code or preliminary site assessment or this page, anything I thought could be linked, I just reminded myself by putting an underline. And I think, like I said, maybe not every word, but anything that refers to someplace else, I think is a hyperlinked document. My understanding of it is the document itself, the verbiage of the document is actually linked. Not that you have to do a separate research project to figure out, I wonder if it's relevant if I go to these links. It's a way to dig down into a topic that you're already on.
It can be to another place, not
yes.
Or it could be to code or
something.
Document.
Yes.
Right.
Or for example, just the word styles. Anytime the word styles comes up, I think it could go to the style page. And then Melanie came up with this, I think, brilliant thing as we were trying to figure out, if this was helping us, of a pre-approved building and planting materials. Sorry, you were going to announce that. But it's on the front page. So the front page is an invention. This is just a cover page. But appendices, there might be many more appendices than this, but these are some ideas, like the review process could be a different document. Obviously, it's come up today already. David was mentioning how, he doesn't know exactly, but a really just standalone review process, very clear. I know there's something in there now, but I do think it needs updating. Context, all types of context. We have style context, we have history context. There could be a series of appendices that are like that. And then Melanie's idea of, here's the buildings and plants we love. If you just limit yourself to this palette, you're not going to get any questions about how appropriate or inappropriate. So it's like a pro message, like, we love Carmel stone. Here's Carmel stone. We love this. We love authentic slate, whatever we love. And planting species too. And so when you're going through this thing, and every time it talks about materials or whatever, it clicks you to a pre-approved list where nobody's going to take issue at the plant. Like, if you build a building out of Carmel stone, nobody is going to say that you chose the wrong stone, or we have questions about the stone. So there's a way to sort of be positive, is what her thought was, instead of saying you can't do this, you can't do this. Like, if you do all this, then you're kind of on a little bit of a fast track.
Can I throw a wrinkle on that
Please,
one for you?
Of course.
So I like the concept of having preferred materials, but as we all know, some of the guidelines in here about overcomplicating. So if we have a list of pre-approved materials and someone says, I want to use 10 of those pre-approved materials on my house,
right,
then that could be a problem.
Right, that's a
so
good
we need
point.
to figure out how to sort of frame that if we go that route.
But don't we talk about that as, you know, we do talk about, you know, narrowing how many materials you use. There are clear sentences in here about, you know, two
or something.
Two, there, you know, 2 types of materials. What on the list, what I'm trying to get at is that there are a lot of things that could be perceived as negative. We don't see them that way, but they may be perceived. So if somebody knows what and has it attached to this document, there is a list of trees that are appropriate for the forest. Olive trees are not appropriate to the forest. They're not indigenous to the forest. You won't find them any place except in an olive grove, or people who are trying to, they like olive trees and so they just plant them in the right of way, or they plant them on their property. If you give people a list of trees that work in our forest, in this urban setting, then that's, I think, extremely helpful to people. I think if you talk about natural materials, and because we make a big stress, and we have in all of our documents about using natural, authentic materials, and you give them a list of that, or if you're talking about types of stone and you can't find Carmel stone, well, what are some other stones that will be appropriate in Carmel? That's the type of thing that you know, I was talking about with Victoria.
It's Roberta.
Don't say that. I don't like it. But one thing I wanted to mention that that really needs some clarification and discussion again is synthetic materials, faux materials. And I asked some months ago, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of detailing, asked that we have a session on synthetic and faux materials, because I can't visualize them being used in Carmel in a real positive way. We have constantly and consistently said that we want natural materials, but yet in the document there's synthetic materials and faux materials, and I feel it's very difficult to write language in a document or to review something that I haven't worked with, and I'm not real comfortable in totally understanding to tell people that no, they can't use something or another without us going and looking at this stuff and feeling it and seeing how it really works. I mean, those of you in the profession know this, but all the rest of us don't know it. And to be really honest and neutral in making the language in this document work for what we're trying to do, I think it's imperative that as soon as we can, that we see samples of such things, and as well as natural, and so we can, have a discussion very soon on this, because we're working on language, and I cannot be impartial or write language or something that I'm not familiar with.
So I think that's a good plug for future agenda items.
Yeah.
It's probably a very casual meeting format today. I'm just skipping to 5. Carol.
I'm just thinking that these materials seem to be evolving rather rapidly, and so it's hard to keep up with that. And I know the Planning Commission looks at those materials when they approve something to make sure they look like the original or the wood or whatever it is, and maybe we should leave it up to them to say that this is, you don't think we should leave it up to them, to say whether it's a natural looking material, only because these things keep evolving, and I know that there are roof tiles now that look much better. You know, we've been relying on these metal roofs, and now there are really great roof tiles that are totally fire retardant, that look much better like shingles. So that's just happened recently. So that's a concern, timing wise.
Maybe I'll jump in here as an architect, and I think that that Melanie has expressed this frustration before, and I think it's a very good. I mean, Melanie is not a lay person in many categories, but she is admitting to be a lay person in materials, and I think in architectural materials, I am not a lay person in architectural materials. It's been a lifelong interest of mine. I think and training, but I think that it is useful to touch and feel, and we haven't, it would be a service to this community, I think, if we take the time to do that. There also, here's another thing that's moving rapidly, Carol, is standards for ecologically sensitive materials. Exactly. So one of the things that's wonderful about Carmel is that because it was built from the trees that originally were here, when it was settled, it is of the place. The stone is from the place. The wood was from the place. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to do that anymore, since we all have already built these lots. But I think that is a natural type of ecology, where you are taking renewable resources, often wood, and you are not transporting them long distances. If a home falls into dereliction, it goes back to Mother Earth. There's been a large amount of research done in the last several decades about how to actually perpetuate those old ways of ecological sensitivity, even with man-made materials. So there's something called circular design. It's also called cradle-to-cradle design or cradle-to-grave design, which is about making sure that something that is not natural has the same principles of ecological responsibility. To me, that is the essence of Carmel. That is my understanding of what makes Carmel so authentic. What we also have, just to outline this for you, in my industry, is pressure, primarily from petroleum companies, to purchase new materials that are really just greenwashing what is a very dirty industry. So, you might, I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but folks who are not in the research mentality about this stuff, who have not read all the literature, have not been studying this their whole life, they are maybe having different concerns, like how cheap is this? Or how quickly can I put this in? And if it's fake and it's from a distance, it doesn't matter. Well, these are things that may not biodegrade. These are things that might not be recyclable. These are things that are really a big break from the Carmel natural tradition. So it's very important in my mind to separate man-made materials that are sensitive and natural in Carmel and man-made materials that are actually reproductions that may be petroleum products, that may be unbiodegradable, that may not be recyclable, that may not be separable, that have toxic coatings, all these sorts of things. The good news is we don't have to invent that wheel. These are standards that exist internationally that have not been introduced to this document before, and yet this round we have introduced international standards of water control. We have some mention of sunlight and energy here for the first time. We have, I think, the night sky standards are an international standard. So I think that is a good default to look at. And so I'm adding to Melanie's desire to touch and feel and really, as a layperson, get to know some of this stuff. I'm adding the research that is out there, that is vast and very, very promising for how to handle man-made materials. Just like we have research on night sky, dark skies, some of the other elements that have worked their way into this draft. So I would recommend we take that same type of approach that for the dark sky, for the water retention, all that, and apply it to the materials as a starting point for making our decisions. I agree with Melanie. I don't find the description now to be up to our standards or up to international or American standards at this point for materials. Yeah. So as a big plug to back you up on that, Melanie.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with the concept that whatever we do from now on should be environmentally and ecologically sensitive. We should be doing things that are right for the environment. And I think when we use natural materials, as Victoria said so eloquently, we don't have to worry about, tearing down something and then throwing it all in the dump and somebody else finding it, years later, and it's still around in the environment. That this is a much more sensitive way of looking at things, but they're also traditionally Carmel, because the people who built this community were very much into not knowing the terminology, but they were really into the environment themselves, and it was reflected in everything that they did early on. And so I think trying to be sensitive to that and promote that is being very, very responsible in our community. And I learned a lot from Victoria when we were working on all of this stuff, because I'd say to her, well, what about this material? What is synthetic? And then so she told me about all of these things. I started on the weekend running around looking at how many plastic garage doors we have that are manufactured, stamped, anywhere in the country, type of thing. It's what they use in subdivisions. I don't think we want that in this town, and they might look to some people as if they're real, but that's because people, yeah, and they're expensive.
Some of them are cheap, and then you can tell.
Yeah, and then others are expensive, more expensive, but do they really accomplish what we want to accomplish in this community about maintaining the uniqueness of this community is not using a bunch of factory-made stuff that's not even real. I mean, I'm becoming really sensitized to, the window aspect, all the details that make a building an outstanding structure, the kind of window materials, the kind of detailing materials in general that are so important to what we're trying to accomplish here. And if we can understand things, as lay people better, from my point of view, for me, it's extremely important to understand these things, because maybe there is something that's A-okay. How would we know it if we didn't have any familiarity? And all of you in the design business, you all understand that, and
Well, I saw some nods around. Would people be interested in a material, subtopic? David?
Well, I was thinking, first started talking about maybe I could go get some samples, or you can have somebody come in and give us a
yeah.
I don't know if they're going to be able to bring in all the samples that we do looking for. It may not be more than one industry where you were talking about windows too, which I hadn't thought of.
Windows, it's roofing, and wall cladding, and all that. But I think that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of time.
I think, from my perspective, we could certainly do field trips. That would be fun, I think not the official kind of thing, but just, anybody who wants to go or something. It would be really cool if people that are doing sustainable work, that is doing alternative.
And look on the steering committee website. Also, there's a few articles about that too that have been there for a while. But just there may be a way to do this I mean, it would be a little bit less, a little bit lower standard, but we could do it with visuals. We could do it with information, with slides.
Yeah. We can get in hard materials. I think what I'm hearing might want to happen is not necessarily to pre-approve every man-made or synthetic type of material. It's really to getting a sampling of materials out here and say what's the commonality of the good ones, so we can better write the language to say. So I think that's very accomplishable in this space. I don't think we have to have. We don't even have to hit every type of material that's going to go on the outside of a building. I think you could pick
principles.
Pick the big ones. A roof, a wall cladding. Window material, and I think you'll be able to tell pretty quickly what is it about the good ones, what are those qualities, and how do you translate those into words. I think that's pretty doable.
Yeah, I do think we need to do some work on that, and also I would encourage us to look at international or national standards of the really great science out there about how to make a building not harm our environment. And again, sometimes I'm just reading the daily paper and I see a great article and I throw it up on that.
If you were doing a project like that, would you be sourcing internationally, or are there local art?
Oh, no, you don't have to source it internationally. No, it's just like international standards of ecological responsibility, of environmental. But no, of course, in fact, local sourcing can be one of the principles for green buildings. I mean, we have never talked about platinum LEED or anything like that. The LEED standards everybody's familiar with. That's a very hard thing to accomplish for most buildings. I think Marianne's house is a LEED house. So people do it because they're devoted to it, and I'm not suggesting, I think that would be a very difficult standard to require, but that's the kind of standards that are out there for building performance, for building materials, and we don't have to do that work.
Do you have some suggestions of the providers, suppliers? I will go around and get some samples for that.
We actually have some in our office too. So we can break down I think that would be like a homework assignment for anybody who wants to participate. If there's, if you recently done your house, and you have some. If you go around town, you ask somebody where they got their materials. And if it costs money, like the city's happy to we'll buy the samples. Most people will give you samples for free, but I don't want you guys to have to spend money. So you find a sample.
I've never.
They typically don't charge you for it, but some of them will charge you the shipping for the sample.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays.
Well, I'm happy to help out. So if you could email me like a list of the things that you have around, and I'll try to fill them.
I will tip my hand on another related topic about materials. So obviously, I've made a case that they should be environmentally friendly. I also personally believe that if you want to do a house that has a rough wood look to it, you should make it out of rough wood.
Yeah.
Period. That's I think what our principals have always said about authenticity. If you want to do that in plastic and you get a really photorealistic, perfectly textured mimicry of rough redwood, I don't want to personally endorse that. So, and there's many, many reasons for that. The things I've cited about environmental and ecological standards, but also about authenticity and quality. So, but there's a nexus where man-made materials actually are authentic and express. So, for example, I happen to be a fan, this is a weird thing to say out loud, but I happen to be a fan of concrete siding, but only if it's not stamped with a fake wood pattern that repeats up and down the thing. If you're sensitive, your eye is trained, and even if you're not, I think you walk by and think, there's something this is not wood. It's almost wood, but there's something funny about it. Is it the fact that I see the same knot over and over again, every two boards is the knot in the 45-degree position? So that is not, I think, in my mind, what Carmel is about. But if it's a concrete board that has a human scale, is clean, is basically similar to a finished board, that's fine to me. It's not trying to be something different than what it is. It's not faux, it's not fake, it's just, and I believe there are probably a number of concrete sided buildings here that none of us would be able to distinguish from a smooth wood building. But a fake pattern on so there are principles here that I don't want to lecture about, but I just want to tip my hand about how I think this is solvable. But anyway, that's maybe enough on that topic.
It's such a good, me to chime in on that, because I want people to start thinking this way, because this is kind of where we're at in the process now, and I love the process. So these types of conversations because I can recall other steering committee meetings where Marianne maybe has a slightly different opinion. I don't want to speak for her, but things like these policy conversations, we had meetings with the community and we did surveys. We got feedback about man-made and synthetic materials. So these bigger sort of policy just calls that we want to suggest in the guidelines, that's going to really need to come out in this, this community meeting that we have coming up with the city council and the planning commission, and really starting to make some of those big policy moves if we're going to make those in this document. So it's great that you're bringing that up, and the only reason I say that is I want everyone to kind of start thinking that way, that now is the time of the process to start highlighting those big policy calls if we want to make those, not sea changes, but like really be succinct about it and clear in the new guidelines that we're going to hopefully get adopted, this year. So it's very topical to bring that type of thing up. So I think,
and maybe we should do it before that
Kind
meeting.
of stuff.
Maybe we need to have this meeting that Melanie is going to have on this topic anyway, because it does involve a little bit of gathering and research and stuff before we head into that meeting, so we can tease out the questions better. That's a good idea, especially if you want to vet it really widely, which I think is right, Brandon.
I think if you ask the public about synthetic, without them having knowledge of what these materials are, it's not a fair question, and you probably won't get an appropriate answer, or at least an informed answer. And that's the kind of thing we want. I don't want people just to react to stuff without having an understanding of really what the impacts of these things are long term. I'm just going to also be very candid about something at this point. I have a huge problem with metal roofs. And I think they changed the character of the site. I think they changed the character of the style of the house. I have a real problem because we don't know what they're going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years. And if we have metal roofs that are of a more natural, of a natural material, that's different than, kind of a factory stamped, thing that I perceive that we're seeing around town. I just saw another one last night, and I said, oh my gosh, if everything's based on cost and everything's based on, on cost and not a sensitivity with how something is viewed in the context of the neighborhood, and if it's just put up there because, somebody said it's okay, I have a problem with that, because I don't think people are really going to understand the impact of something like these roofs if they don't look into down the line what the fabric is of these roofs and how it's really going to age. There's an assumption that because they're manufactured and there's this color and that they're muted, that it's going to really work. I don't want to wait till we have, a huge number of these things before people really think about what this is going to do to the community long term.
I know Marianne and Brandon. Yeah. Brandon has.
Marianne, go ahead if you want to add something in.
That she would have material thoughts, and I know she will.
Yeah, Melanie, I just wanted to point out, Melanie, that the Frank Lloyd Wright House has a metal roof. Can you hear me? Yeah. And so, and then if you do want to bring in sustainability, I wanted to say this is great. It's very complex because the Frank Lloyd Wright House has a wonderful copper roof, and I don't think you can really support copper any longer if you want to have a sustainable project. And so these blanket, this is always this very difficult thing to have blanket statements like we don't want concrete or we don't want metal, because as you know, I mean, copper roofs are on wonderful old cathedrals and all over the world, very historic buildings. So a metal roof, which happens to be, very fire resistant, can be a good solution. There's wonderful, Corten shingles, for example, out there right now that I find very attractive. So there are metal roofs that I think can be, again, that comes back to sampling, that can be very appropriate for the town. And I think we are again reacting to just some really bad applications that are that are not to scale and not suitable, that we have seen crop up all over town lately. I do have a question to Brandon. Is this something that I haven't seen yet, but are we going to integrate sustainability to the guidelines, sustainability references, because that's a whole nother project. I think if I would fully support that, but that's a whole nother complex topic. To what degree and how to integrate that?
There are new sustainable topics that are new to this draft. That was what I was referring to earlier. And this is a request now that we think of materials that way also.
Yeah, but I think to the bigger question of I think the short answer to your next question is no. We're not doing a big sustainability section in this. Where it's appropriate, like things like new guidelines about requirements for solar and other green things coming, where we have to address them. We're addressing those in here, drainage and things like that. But we're not necessarily doing, because you're right, Marianne, that would be a very big project to do like a sustainability run through on the entire guidelines. We're not doing that as part of this project.
But it's shown up now for the first time, and I think there are places it could plug in that would be useful in terms of an organizing way to think about something. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking using the design guidelines, and we're trying to figure out materials that are appropriate. We're talking about fire safety, we're talking about the environment, we're talking about fire safety, we're talking about the environment, and we're talking about design. So if we can come up with a concept that the planning department can use to make a judicious decision based on, okay, does it look nice? Okay, is it environmentally sound? Is it good for fires? If it can't meet all of those things, or it's better or worse than one of those things, we're going to have to see if we figured out like what is the priority, maybe set it that way so that if you get 2 out of 3 or something like that.
Or even back to Melanie's pre-approved list, there might be some fantastic products that we just think, yeah, I mean, of course, like if you're gonna put a zinc roof up, a natural zinc roof, like in Paris, that has no coating, that patinas gorgeously over time, maybe that's, if you're gonna do a metal roof, if you say you're gonna do zinc, then we're not gonna question the material choice of your roof. For example, I just think there might be things, same with stone. You're going to use stone, so maybe, I don't know, maybe zinc is bad, I don't know. But
Yeah.
maybe stone,
Zinc can be used in a salt environment, just FYI. So let's not do that.
okay, I was just
Yeah.
throwing that out.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
pick a metal, it can't be copper, I agree with that. But that is something we say, well, listen, there's a lot of controversy around metal roofs, but if you do it this way, then that one is likely to not be controversial.
And I like the idea of a list of materials that people could generally get past the planning commission. But I think they all have caveats, depends on the style.
have a caveat in there, something effective, but how they're applied and the number in which they're applied is controlled within the bigger document. So it's not a list of pre-approved materials because you're gonna get yourself in a bunch of trouble doing that. Yeah.
You're right, you're right. Preferred in context. Yeah. Right? Yeah, there can be a nice little caveat at the front of the list, like these are, but they have to all, look at the rest of the guidelines, everybody.
Yeah.
Next, Mary Ann, a question on a
Yes,
different
go.
subject.
Yes.
You there, Mary Ann?
She's listening.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I haven't asked you yet. In the residential design guidelines, talking about gates, there's a policy, monumental posts or columns are inappropriate. You were the guiding light for that policy from our tour. Do you want to enunciate, because David has a different opinion as to why you think that's important?
Doug, I haven't been able to understand you when you speak throughout the whole session, so I apologize. It's very garbled, and I don't know if it's the microphone or distance from the microphone. I just can't hear you.
Can you hear me right now, Mary Ann? Yeah, I think it's the fact that
I'll wait till she gets back.
No. Let's have Brandon take a stab.
So Mary Ann, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go in the other room so I don't get feedback, and then I could ask the question for Doug.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, so the question from Doug was, you had been sort of the guiding light early on about, the stone columns and fences and things like that. We had a question earlier on from David about, what is it that makes those inappropriate? So maybe you could enunciate that or explain that a little bit further as to why, why you feel that those stone sort of, even when they're small, sort of like estate-ish sort of columns, why those may be inappropriate.
We wanted an explanation of why the tiny stone.
Okay, start over. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
did I hear this correctly, that there was a request to explain why the tiny stone columns are inappropriate? Or stone columns in general?
What do you want to say?
Well, I think aesthetically, for columns should always relate to what they are supposed to support, right? So that, visually, I think that is one criteria for columns on a house. And I think for Carmel, these are very recent that we have stone columns on property lines. If we want to keep a natural environment, then we should try to have our borders between the public space and the private space porous, so to speak, and there's really good examples of wood fences throughout the town, and I think also in the guidelines itself. And there's also really nice examples of walls. It's just these tiny little posts, columns that imitate something from larger estates that have beautiful columns and entries, just in miniature form. I think that's where the problem lies with the little posts that are sticking out all over town.
I think I understand what she's saying, and I don't know if that was clear, but I think Marianne, when we were touring around with her, had observations about it's almost a scale issue and a critical mass. Yeah, and a coordination issue. So if you have a little wood cottage and maybe picket wood fence, one of the things that we observed when we drove around was picket wood fence, fairly modest building, and then grandiose styled stone pillars going between the pickets. That was one thing that was, or a modest fence with stone pillars out of nowhere that are new additions. I think the picture of your house, I didn't know it was your house, might be a stone building with a low stone wall. It might be an integrated design. It's still not the guidelines we had preferred to have any borders at all. It's preferred to have the forest flow, et cetera. So it kind of goes, at least in the current documents and old documents, it goes from try to keep everything natural to if you're going to add something, make it porous, as Mary Ann said. If you're going to add a wall, make it modest. So it kind of steps up from nothing to more and more. But what she has been seeing is we all have, is a proliferation of people saying, I'll add a fancy gate with a big stone column to an inappropriate setting. And even so far as we've talked about this committee, it's like automotive gates with big, like the driveway is the same size as the gate, and it's just this estate feel. So I think it might be more a kind of a scaling and a context issue. I don't know your house, David, so I don't know.
It is because I've lived in France, I think it was needing to be French, but it's kind of English style. And it looks like a lot of the Cotswold homes that are right along the streets, and they have little courtyards in front with little walls and wooden fences, and stone columns, for support. They support the gate, I think that's the thing that is appropriate about a well-sized stone pillar, is that it supports the gate, so the gate doesn't fall.
There's also a stone wall attached to it.
There is a stone wall as well. I'm not trying to say that I like great big monumental stone pillars for small homes and stuff like that. That doesn't make sense. But if they are in scale and they look like they're proportionally holding the gate up, then I think that should be acceptable.
And I believe it's iterated that way in the document. But I also think, Mary, and I'm just because of audio, I'm just going to take a stab at representing something she's also said publicly and maybe privately. It's also a matter of how the stone is applied. Yeah. All over town, we have this sort of veneer stone that is, so I have walls on my property that are stone because I live on a slope. They're retaining walls, and they are just from the property. Let's talk about old Carmel. They're just golden granite, native stone that were rolled in to support it. They're huge, huge stones. They're structural stones. What Marion has seen all over town is some kind of either wood or concrete thing with little thin, almost like bathroom tile stone, but of the type that is clearly veneer. So that's just fake. And I think that's one of the things. Am I capturing that, Marianne?
Yeah, and I do believe that if we would be successful in having a very prescriptive landscape ordinance, if it, for example, said for site walls you can only use Carmel stone, if you could go this far, even if it's not executed that great on one property, or even if it's a little not the right proportion on another property, because of the uniformity of the material, I think it just still would be a nice streetscape. What we have now is we have one tiny column that has glued on tiny little stone tiles. We have a next column that has a different stone that got imported from who knows where. We have a third stone column, or a brick column that was painted, and it's this complete mishmash that's turning up all over town that really sticks out.
I would really love if I could just project this, but I have a huge amount of pictures here of the stone columns in our neighborhood. There's bricks columns, there's stone columns. One of the stone columns is actually from one of our, famous houses. You see here, this is from one of the famous houses. Do you recognize it just down the street?
Yeah. That's a Carmel stone.
I think, yeah, and and then you've got craftsman style like that. It goes on, and this person wanted to have. I don't know if I like the gate personally, but it's proportional, and it goes with the walkway. So it goes with the house. I think also the gate should go with the house. So if the house isn't really, let's say it's a different kind of stone than Carmel stone, I think it is appropriate to have a wall that's made of the same stone. So I feel very strongly about this. I think that there's lots of examples of people doing columns with their gates, it's a structural format. You know, this is why they were built like this in the past, you know, so that they could hold up the gate. So I think saying that those, you know, monumental is fine, like, but what is monumental? How big is monumental? These are not monumental. These are just low.
Well, there's actual numbers right now in the draft that I happen to notice. There's something about you have to be able to see over it. Things have to be 4 feet or less, I think. There's a whole thing of, so I, you know, again, maybe needs to clarify that to keep scale right.
Yeah. When you say monumental is fine, you don't mean monumental is fine. You mean that
The
to
wording,
avoid monumental is
yeah,
fine.
when
Yeah.
to say like, you know, they don't want monumental pillars. I agree, absolutely. Seeing over them, it's great, you know, natural stone, but that we talk about that and not using, you know, fake stuff, right? Things that don't look natural.
And also, you know, again, these are violations, and this goes back to usability. If we can get this more user-friendly and more easy to locate information, we already have the principles that stone has to be applied structurally, but it's not. That's what Marianne is, one of the things Marianne's upset about.
Well, one of the things too, if you think about it, is that the guidelines, the old one's 25 years old, and the first draft, they both have language in there that says start from no fence.
Right.
I mean, that's the first guidance. And it's not one of the guiding principles. You know what I mean? That's where you start from. And then in order to, the way that it should work, in order to have you know, some sort of column or like gate entryway approved, then it has to pass these other tests to make sure that it's the right way to do it. So I think this is, you know, another example of making sure that that's clearly laid out. Using maybe this is another example of using that sort of like glossary at the end where it says, you know, gates or columns. You start with, you know, page 3 where it says don't have a fence.
Right.
And then go to page 14 where it says if you're going to do it, here's how you do it. So this is the sort of usability thing that you know, even, you know, the first draft we all agree needs, this is where it needs some refinement.
I think bottom line is that one picture of David's fence, gate, pillar, whatever you want to call it, is not a good example of what we don't want, because when you drive by that, it seems to fit. It looks appropriate to the house. Where there are many that don't look, I agree with Mary Ann and Victoria's views on that and how we have it. It's just that we can't just say every stone pillar isn't appropriate, because in that case it is. And so we should eliminate at least that picture, because it's not appropriate.
I think they really need to be in scale. I think the problem of what's going on now in a lot of neighborhoods is that the idea of having columns and, you know, a movable gate and all of this, it doesn't speak to
be like, oh, that's what I was just reading about, and here it is.
It captures the essence.
It captures the essence of whatever. Of course, I mean, maybe not of course, I don't think images need to be redundant. If we find a really great, just because it might be confusing, which one? If we find a really great example of something, you don't have to put 20 that are basically the same, in my opinion. Of course, in an appendix, maybe there's some room for that, but certainly within the text. I think if a concept stands well enough alone, I don't know that it needs to be illustrated. So that's the flip side. So for example, if someone says, and I don't want to harsh on the skylight image because it's fine, and I like it, it's cute, but it says, put the skylights on the back, and then you have a picture of skylights on the front and skylights on the back. It's kind of an example of an adorable image that if you had to cut images, I think, I know what putting on the back means. I don't probably need to illustrate, but you know, it's a test. Like, if I only have so much real estate in the document, what is the really great images? I think that every image should be an outstanding example of what it hopes to convey. Not an okay example, not a mediocre example. What is our best example in town?
Something outstanding.
Yeah, what is it? Just like we have these beloved things in town. I like my house. It was a fixer-upper, big time. It's not an outstanding example, really. I found it the way it is. I've done what I can. But I don't know. I wouldn't, unless it was illustrating something very clearly. It actually has a metal roof. Trying to bring Melanie around too. I also, this is on the same page, if an image is illustrating a concept, I would hope that it does not violate any aspect of our design guidelines.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, for example, I've seen pictures that show beautiful treescape and how you bring the forest feel into your front yard. And then right in the beginning is a veneered state gate in the foreground. The image is not about that. You certainly would have an X through that part of it. But actually, we need to be rigorous about finding images that do not have any violations in them.
Right.
Create a subpoint.
Yeah. Amen.
Right. I think there should be all of our yes images about something. Maybe this is already true. All the things that we have a check mark should be from Carmel-by-the-Sea. Everything that's not good, probably because of poor David especially, has an X in it, should not be from here. I think it's possible. Now maybe we can't find that, but we can.
Or at least unidentifiable.
Unidentifiable, or
yeah. Let's not offend our people. Yeah.
Right.
There are a lot of them out on the point.
And I think we need to provide more images for no's. I don't know why, but I just find that a little bit harder to understand sometimes. What is a bad thing? And I don't think, as long as it's not from your neighbor's property, I don't think that's offensive. And then the last thing about images, you just welcome the no images? Yes, I welcome them. And then the last thing I thought about the images is that a lot of them talk about context, which is so important. And it's going through our whole document. And then we don't see the context of the image. That's not true everywhere. For example, there's a nice image of a streetscape in downtown, like line up all the storefronts in a reasonable way, and then you have to see the whole line of street. But for example, the context of a gate, or the context of following the forest character from one property to the next, you then need to see more than one property, if it's possible. Now, some of this is not easy to do in a thumbnail, but I don't think we can make claims about context and not show context.
Right.
So that's a fairly long list, and I don't know why, but somehow this process of digesting this really clarified for me personally, what I would like to see in a really well selected image.
Those make sense to me. Excellent.
Yeah.
I just, I'm looking through here just to make sure that I'm correct. I've been to the Cotswolds, but I didn't really look at the wall fences. Usually the stone columns are with a stone wall. Okay, so in this scenario here, there's a column in between the two gates, but there are walls on either side. So our application is more accurate.
No one's coming to take down your fence.
No, I got mine in.
Defend your fence today.
No, but I'd like to see more fences like that. You know, I like how ours looks. And I think a lot of people who have dogs would really like to have some more space that's fenced in for their dogs. And this is a dog-friendly place. So this idea of not having fences is really good because I love the idea of all the open space between the buildings and stuff. But there's some elements of practicality of our lifestyle, the Carmel lifestyle, that could be.
And again, I mean, not to detract from a good wall, and there are many very good antique examples around town. And to the extent that it suits a place, I mean, I don't feel that picky about it. But I agree, open first. We've always had that in it. And if you have a safety or a pet issue or a child issue or there's some or privacy issue, and you need to start thinking about a more permanent boundary, then the guidelines at least say try an open fence first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, maybe there's an argument that has to do with style or context that gets you to a more and more solid thing. But I do think that I hope it's clear, and I want it to continue to be clear or clearer, that the default is the open space, unless the whole town doesn't agree with that. But I think that has not been particularly controversial so far.
Everything I've heard too. Can I make a suggestion?
Please.
Since we have to be clear of this room in 20 minutes.
Yes.
And so there's a couple of things that I think it's been a wonderful conversation on just sort of like high level stuff about the guidelines. So I'll defer to the chair, obviously, but I would suggest maybe if we can talk a little bit about the next meeting to continue to talk about the guidelines. So maybe like next week or later this week. And then I would appreciate some feedback on the concept that you and I have been throwing around about the joint meeting for the bigger community meeting in about a month, just to make sure that everyone thinks that's an okay approach. And then I can start talking to the council members and the planning commissioners and reaching out to Sunset Center. So that would be helpful for me to get that.
Thank you, Brandon, for reminding me. I asked Brandon to interrupt me, and I'm very happy that you have. So we're you know, quite a ways nicely through topic A, discussion items. We obviously have more to figure out, and we can either decide in a few minutes whether we want to continue to a meeting or I think we want to continue.
Let's just continue it. I mean, there's no reason to read. I mean, yeah, we'll notice it like we do, but let's just call it a continue.
We'll look at calendars shortly, or maybe if we have to leave the room offline. But yeah, item B is the joint community meeting concept that Brandon and I have been talking about.
And tee it up a little bit?
Please.
Okay. So as we've evolved, I mean, even just the way that we're physically set up today, this has continued to be an evolution of how we're going through this document, and it's just been great. So, and in keeping in that spirit, the original plan on paper, sort of like the hard plan was, you know, get the feedback from the steering committee and the community at the steering committee forum, then have a community meeting, then have a planning commission meeting, then have a city council meeting, and collect feedback at all of the stops along the way. And what's seeming to be more and more productive is these more organic type of meetings. So what we were talking about potentially is combining essentially the community meeting, the planning commission meeting, and the city council meeting, because all of those were intended to gather feedback on the draft anyway. So why not have all those entities together at the Sunset Center so the city council members can hear from the community, from the planning commissioners, you can talk face to face, you know, we can
That's really great.
Work. And Nori and I have talked a little bit about this too. We would probably propose breaking it up into 2 evenings, one commercial, one residential. But this would be a really good forum, I think, to get very specific feedback. We'd look at designing workbooks again. For those of you that came to the last session, we added that touch with the workbooks, and we got a lot more feedback that way. People felt like they didn't have to get it all out that night. They could turn it in afterwards. So that's the concept would be, and unintended benefit of that is actually then we don't have to plan for 3 meetings sequentially, like community meeting, planning commission, city council. We take our schedule and we kind of compress our schedule a little bit too by getting all of that feedback in one evening and maybe even making it more productive. So that was what Victoria and I have been talking about. But we wanted to get feedback from the steering committee as a whole to see what you guys thought about that concept, and then also obviously hear from the community as well.
Thank you, Brandon, for explaining all that. Any thoughts from the public first?
I think that's excellent. I think we have to reinvent the wheel every time we go to a different group, and it isn't everyone in the same room. And this just makes perfect sense that we all get to hear from one another and come up with some solutions. I really like that.
I'm a little bit curious. I don't understand how revisions will be done. Can you explain that to us?
Well, right now the plan is, because it's evolved. Right now the plan would be, we're in the information gathering phase right now. So we're gathering information. That's kind of why I asked my question earlier about what Melanie and Victoria did. Is like, how does it? I'm trying to in my head like puzzle it together. Like, how does it all fit together? How do we take all this great feedback and turn it into a redraft? So right now, what I'm anticipating is we have another meeting of the steering committee in this format. We finish up our conversation, then we have this community meeting. And we're going to get more detailed feedback. And I think that what we want to try to drive at that meeting will probably be getting that as much of that detailed sort of feedback in the meeting, letting the Planning Commission and the City Council interact and respond to that. And if we can get a good idea of where the policy decisions want to go at that meeting, then we can take all that information that we've heard from these meetings and that community meeting, and that will basically be the redraft. So then we'll put out a round 2 of the draft guidelines. Nori and his team will work on a redraft. We'll launch it again. Say, how do we do? Are we getting closer? And then.
So, like the things that we talked about today would be something we would bring up again at that meeting.
I think so. One of the things I think we would do is we would preload that community meeting with the stuff we're pulling out from the steering committee process right now. So that would be sort of like a pre-workshop material that would go out like we've done before. Here's what we've heard at the steering committee meeting. Here are some of the big concepts that we're thinking we need to change in the design guidelines. Agree, disagree, whatever, but have that front-loaded in people's minds so when they come with their comments, they already kind of know what's been said if they haven't been able to participate in that. So it would build on what we're doing today. It wouldn't be like we set this aside and you have to say it again.
Yeah.
Community meeting. This what we're doing with the steering committee right now was always intended to flow through the process. So now it just organically becomes part of the introductory materials for the workshop. So here's the first round of comments we've gotten. Now we want to hear from the bigger community with the Planning Commission and the City Council in the room.
Thank you.
Here's the February 9th edition. Everybody have a copy of those.
Right.
And then the next year would be comments from this meeting.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a redraft. So we're not gonna take February 9th edition and redraft it. That will just remain, and then it'll be like a little side doc. Here's what we think needs to change in that, and then we'll get basically another version of what we think needs to change in that. And then Nori and his team and my team will take all those comments, push them through this, and do the redraft, and then relaunch it out and say, how do we do?
Will it be possible for us to see that beforehand so that we can see if there's anything that we would like to add?
What came out of the steering committee?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to look to the chair. That seems like the best.
Of course, the chair first.
When it comes to the steering
right.
the public.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah.
But that makes good sense to me to vet what the recommendations are before they go.
Well, really, we're talking in some ways about just trying to stay on top of a minutes process, I've been taking notes, Doug's been taking notes, I see many notes here. I do think we need to, try to be timely about, recording this stuff. There are types of styles of minutes where you just say there was a discussion that was had, but that's never been the type I like. I've always been more in that. So if we can do detailed minutes about commentary and try to capture it the best we can, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and truthfully, the best way, I'm saying this to steering committee members too, so for Dawn, Dawn, I was taking notes as you were writing, but for all the steering committee members and anybody in the public that's commented, if you can give us written comments, like bullets, the best thing for me is bullets. If we can get bullets, then that's what we can put together as sort of like the product that comes out of the steering committee stuff.
You have bullets.
Yours is a great example, David, and there's others that sent in comments as well. So,
I had one. So nobody's really weighing in yet, but please think about it. You can send comments to Brandon or me or whatever, but about how to handle that meeting and what the goals of that meeting should be. That big meeting. One thought that I had is I would really like to hear from the Planning Commission more. I think that they are members of the public just like us. they deal with the kind of what happens, what are the types of arguments that we're having all the time, what are the controversial projects? I know that we are the ones rolling up our sleeves to read this thing 3 times if you're David, we might not be able to get people who are volunteering to do a whole lot of other work to do that also, but I would like to encourage them to do that. I have even less I don't know, I want to be even less presumptuous for the council. This is really not a lot. I don't think a single member of the council has ever been on the planning commission right now. Is that right?
On Forest and Beach, I think you're right.
Yeah. That's unusual for Carmel. And so, again, the idea that they would roll up their sleeves, I think would be great. I would love it, but I just think the odds of it being done, the odds with the busy other schedule of other topics that are not related to planning, I think with no planning background, even a strong planning interest from many of them, I just am not sure we're going to get that horn. But that's what I would want, ideally. But I do think we have a chance of getting it from the Planning Commission, even if it's just on procedural issues or difficulties they have, or how do they find things in the code, or anything that they run across. Wouldn't it be better if, and I would like to see them centered actually around the table more so than the general public, I will say, and have the general public then be able to hear from them and be able to react to that. That's an instinct I have, is that that's a missing part of the constituency. So I throw that out there, the formatting option.
Also, I think the planning department, we'd love to hear notes from what frustrates you. Where do you have conflicts that are difficult for you to resolve?
Yeah, I agree. This is like...
Yeah, they're on the front line, those two.
They have to use it.
No, I think that's great. I guess we're talking about, like, we think we go to the meetings, we see the arguments, whatever, but we don't know the back of the house, how it happened, whatever, how it got to that point. I think everyone involved in the approval. So you guys that'd be terrific. And that doesn't mean the public's not there, but we've been talking a lot, the public. I think
which is how this was designed intentionally.
I know, but being able to react to like a new issue that we might not have thought of because it's really internal issue, or I don't mean internal like private, but something that doesn't usually make it all the way out. I think it's really good. So that would be my preference. Okay. And that is not, so that you don't have to tee everything up for a similar round of, questions to the public. If there are new things to consider, yes. But
one of the most important things to get out of that workshop is going to be what edits need to be made, in your opinion, as a member of the public, to round 1 of the draft guidelines. So that is important. We are going to ask those kinds of questions.
Sure.
So that's a very important thing to get out of the community. But
maybe that could be after we hear from everybody.
Sure.
Maybe. I don't know.
But I think the feedback I really wanted was, does this sound like a cockadoodie idea, or does it sound like a good idea? It sounds like a good idea. So I'm going to start working to pull together all the necessary parties and reserving the space and all that stuff. Because we're going to have another meeting, obviously.
Yeah, I think
so. We can continue to refine what the goals of that are.
Yeah.
But maybe with the 6 or 7 minutes that we have left, we can figure out schedules amongst ourselves.
What's our best homework?
Well, then so the question is, maybe do we want to continue this meeting until later in this week, which would have to be, I think we've lost Mary Ann, but for me, I couldn't do Thursday morning. I don't know. Yes, I can do either those afternoons. I can also do next week, but do you guys know your schedules at all? Am I right here?
Yeah, I can do tomorrow or Friday.
In the afternoon?
Yeah.
About the gentleman here on the steering committee. Tomorrow or Friday.
I'm out of town tomorrow.
Are you here on Friday?
Here on Friday.
I can do Friday afternoon. No? Okay, we think tentatively that at least the steering committee can make it Friday afternoon. We probably won't have Mary Ann though. Although it'd be great.
Yeah, I'll ask her, but that's late in the evening for her.
Yeah.
So
So when we say afternoon, I can do.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. That was
Maybe 4. Call it a couple hours. I mean, Friday afternoon. I don't know if we can do a 3-hour session without all of us falling out of our chairs.
Yeah, so 2 to 4 when? On Friday afternoon, this Friday. So we're going to continue the meeting. So we have 5. Why don't we adjourn 5 minutes early?
That's unheard of.
Hi, class.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you.
2, yeah.
Before we go, can we vote on the list? Before we go, can we vote on the list?
Are we ready to vote on the list? We lost Mary Ann. Vote on the list today? Are you want
your
today or could you handle Friday?
It's Friday, okay.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I know, but, and Nori. Is Nori still there?